Welcome to IoTalks, your source for real talks with real builders in the blockchain and IoT industry. I'm your host, Larry. Today's IoTalks is all about the past, present, and future of streaming. The streaming industry is barely a decade old, but is already valued at over $20 billion. Whether you're binging Netflix shows, streaming live TV and esports events, or video chatting with loved ones, streaming has become part of our daily lives. So how did this all happen, and how can blockchain and IoT push streaming to greater heights? We discuss this and more with our guests Timothy Lee and Wes Levitt from Theta Network. Please enjoy. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to IoTalks. Today we have a very special guest, Theta Network. Theta is disrupting the online video streaming industry. They're using a decentralized peer-to-peer network that offers improved video delivery at lower costs using tokenized bandwidth sharing. Today we're going to talk about the past, present, and future of streaming. So let's start with Wes and Tim to do some short introductions.
Sure. Hey, I'm Wes, head of strategy at Theta Labs, and take lead on kind of general business strategy, marketing, and anything as relates to the Theta token itself. My background's in real estate and finance originally, but got very deep in the blockchain space while I was at Berkeley a couple years ago with their awesome blockchain scene. And started working with the Theta team a couple years ago, a little bit prior to the launch of Theta Token.
That's 10 years in crypto years.
Yeah, right. 2 years the age weighs on you.
Yeah. How about you, Tim?
I'm Timothy Lee, head of platform at Theta Labs. So job responsibilities include everything from overseeing the product roadmap to doing integration work with our partners, corporate partners especially. So everything from talking to them, pitching to them, sourcing them, and then engaging them with proof of concept projects, and then working with our engineers, working with Wes and the marketing team to really hone in what the messaging is and how we're going to roll out these partners onto our platform.
Very cool. So during today's session, we're going to talk about all things platform, all things marketing, all things data, and all things streaming. So, just to kick it off with some basics about streaming for maybe some beginner listeners. What is streaming, and how would you explain it to kind of a beginner?
Sure. So video streaming basically is you're downloading video files from the internet, and then you have a video player. So your video player is basically piecing together short fragments or short segments of video in order. So a good example is when you're watching a YouTube video, right? Your red bar and your red dot is moving along, and that's your playback speed. But then you'll notice this gray bar that's moving ahead of the red one, which is basically the player is downloading these video segments ahead of the video playback, and you're basically just downloading it, and then you're watching your video from there. So that's various forms of video streaming as well. There's live streaming, video on demand, so different form factors of video streaming, if you will.
Right. Yeah, so just in the past decade, I'm sure we all remember back in our day when we were in high school or something, none of this existed, right? So this industry has kind of blossomed very, very quickly. We're going from days of buffering,
real player
240p video, exactly, all the way now to streaming on HD data on mobile. So can you kind of walk us through how that evolution happened?
I'd definitely say that the internet infrastructure has definitely improved as well. So basically, right now, when you hit a video on Netflix or YouTube, they use these content delivery networks. So they're called CDNs for short. And so how these CDNs work is they're literally building physical infrastructure all over the world, right? And then they have these ISPs also have undersea cables, so that basically the internet from continent to continent is streamlined and is fast enough. So basically, what these CDNs do, they're building these POPs called points of presence closer to large demographics of users that need to watch video. So they cache the popular video content there. And then so when you hit the stream, you don't have to wait for it to load. Right. There's no latency. There's no buffering issues like you mentioned. It's just a smooth playback experience, right? So that's mostly what we've been seeing in developed countries. But the problem is in developing regions of the world, like say South America, Eastern Europe, Africa, those areas, the CDN infrastructure is not fully built out enough, right? So you could say that the points of presence are not present enough to serve all those users, right? So that's kind of how the last mile delivery problem happens. Those users will experience these playback issues, these latency and bandwidth issues.
Right. So that's definitely on the tech side. So the more pops, the more, I guess, you're kind of bound by this like concept of the speed of light, right? You can only travel so far and so fast.
Right.
The closer you are to the pop, the easier it is. But I guess on the non-tech side too, like what kind of advancements have been made? Like big investments from the Google, Facebooks, and the telcos of the world. How has that kind of shaped the industry?
Yeah, like it's definitely a big piece of it. It's hard to remember now YouTube before Google, but if you actually back, it was a relatively small site in the scheme of things. Before they actually had the money behind them to invest in the infrastructure necessary to where anyone in the world could be creating this user-generated content and distributed to more or less anyone that wants to watch it. So it didn't happen overnight. It obviously is incremental, although you definitely saw it kind of the rate speeding up once the large players start getting into the space.
And the Netflixes, the YouTubes, the Amazons of the world, they've all built out their dedicated infrastructure to deliver video, right? The problem is with mid-size and smaller video platforms, right? They don't have that dedicated infrastructure to actually, to even scale to that extent, right? So that's where a lot of the problems come in.
That's a really interesting point. So like these smaller and medium-sized players that have great content to share, but don't have that infrastructure to maybe match the user experience of these larger players.
Right.
Like how do they compete today? Is it kind of they license that infrastructure from the bigger players?
Yeah. Frequently, it's not that they can't have access. It's just that it's not nearly as economical for them, and that's even more so a problem for as you get to be a smaller platform like Sliver TV as we're starting out. We can talk a little bit more about that, but that was a big pain point for us. Is that we're certainly not getting the unit economics that a Google or a Netflix is getting when it comes to video delivery costs.
Right, and that must be part of the reason why Sliver kind of created Theta to manage a lot of that data delivery and things like that. But before we dive into Sliver and Theta, some household names in streaming. You mentioned YouTube. There's also Twitch and Mixer and Sliver TV, which is they're all streaming platforms. So how are these kind of differentiated? Like if I was a content creator today and I wanted to push my content out there, how would I choose between kind of some of the incumbents today?
Yeah, so just kind of with the big players, at least in the Western markets, Twitch and YouTube are obviously the largest players by far. Twitch originally had a gaming background or focus, even though they're moving a little bit more into kind of generalized stream, but it tended to be YouTube was the place to go because you want to go where users are, whereas Twitch was a little bit more specialized. Both of those tend to be sort of what we call more passive experiences, that you just watch content and that's it. Sliver TV, which is, by way of background, our esports platform that led to the growth of Theta Labs. We try to differentiate by making a much more interactive experience.
Right. And you guys do like surveys or like even polls, like who's going to win this match.
Trivia questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Get crates and stuff for winning.
Yeah, it really ups the engagement of the viewers, right?
Yeah, and it's one thing to just have something like that, like a poll you can participate in, but what really gets interesting is the streamers themselves, the content creators, use that as a way to directly engage with the users constantly. So it's always something where like users can even direct them how they want to play the game. Like they'll take a poll of how should I play this next match? What weapon loadout should I use if I'm playing Counter-Strike? That kind of thing.
Right.
And
so it makes them feel more part of the experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a much different experience than if you're just having this one way. You're just taking content that someone created and you just watch it.
Yeah.
So that's a main reason why we differentiate.
Definitely. That's cool.
I'd say also for streaming platforms, it's not just confined to user-generated content like your YouTubes and Twitches of the world, right? You also have Disney, they're coming out with their own streaming platform, right? They're moving all their content onto this dedicated platform, right? All the Star Wars, all the Marvels of the world. You have Pluto TV and Tubi TV. They actually are licensing a lot of really popular content, and then they're just giving it out for free in return for watching ads. You have Amazon Prime Now and Netflix, which are subscription video on demand services. These are all great examples of video streaming, which is just video delivered over internet, right? And these are all use cases that the underlying thing is that they need this dedicated infrastructure to deliver their video streams for them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's switch gears now to talking more about Sliver and Theta. So for those that don't know, Sliver founded Theta Labs, and Sliver had previous partnerships with Samsung VR, as Wes mentioned, more focused on the esports to start with. But from your own words, can you talk to us about what Sliver is, what the goals are, and kind of how Theta connects to that?
Yeah. So Sliver TV was founded in late 2015, early 2016. As an esports streaming site focused on VR content, so live events where they have VR cameras actually placed in these esports tournaments, both in the arena and in game, where they'd actually be rendering the game environments in 3D or in VR, which was very successful from a technical perspective, but it ran into an issue where there's not enough adoption of VR headsets and the gear associated with it. Yeah. So it's a great accomplishment, but it's a little early.
Right.
So one thing that it branched out to is just kind of more generalized esports streaming platform, with the differentiator being these interactive elements, which is how we compete against the Twitches of the world. But a pain point we realized pretty early on is what we were talking about earlier is we don't get the same CDN rates that a big platform does, not even close to it. So, our expenses may be 40% for a given month, maybe CDN costs, which is astronomical for a startup to be paying that kind of money for cloud services, that kind of thing.
Right.
So, thinking through a way to solve that point, we were talking with W1, who at the time was on our board as part of DHVC being the lead investor in our Series A. And obviously with her significant background in blockchain and distributed systems, she had the idea that if there's a way we can defray some of this cost by creating a distributed network to all these users, you can solve that pain point. Right. And it actually makes a lot of sense for our use case, because esports is a pretty, it's a global phenomenon, of course, everyone knows, but it tend to be pretty distributed in certain areas, like Tim had mentioned in Eastern Europe. There's large pockets of users that are dedicated fans of this given streamer, this game. Yeah. So it actually makes sense to take advantage of those clustered users and allow them to share video amongst them peer to peer. Right. It kind of has already the characteristics you need to have a good peer to peer network kind of built into it. Right. And so that was the genesis of the idea of the Theta Network: is how can we deliver video to these groups of users in a peer-to-peer fashion, rather than us paying CDN costs to deliver the same video 10 times to 10 different people, all in the same city.
Right. That makes sense from a goals perspective. So how does that translate for the platform design?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting, right, to have Sliver TV as kind of the first DApp. Think of it as the first DApp, if you will, on top of the entire Theta infrastructure, which is the blockchain protocol. In that way, we get to, we have 2.5 to 3 million MAUs, monthly active users, on our platform. So it's a substantial platform with real world users. Yeah. And so that way, we're able to actually see how our blockchain scales up. We have a lot of these insights and lessons learned that we first test on, or using Sliver TV kind of as a test bed platform. And then we can take a lot of these insights and then apply them to our other corporate partners that are also developing these DApps, or have these platforms that they can come over and port over as DApps on the Theta protocol itself. Right. So I'd say, like what Wes mentioned earlier, peer-to-peer is not new, right? It's been around for the past 20 years. Yeah. The thing that we think is really innovative that Theta Protocol has done is we've been able to port this peer-to-peer layer on top of a blockchain, right? So in that sense, for every video segment that is sent and relayed in between this mesh network, we're appending it with one micropayment. Right. And that's recorded on the blockchain as well. Right. And so when that happens, you're able to allow your users to earn token rewards for their actual contributions to the network. Whereas in the past, peer-to-peer was maybe associated more with counterfeit content or piracy and stuff like that. Now you're able to, kind of incentivize the users to actually contribute their resources, and then it makes it actually into a legitimate use case and then a legitimate business that other video platforms can come and utilize our technology and our infrastructure and build on top of it.
Definitely. It's almost taking kind of like the Amazon Web Services model where they kind of built it as an internal use, and then once it was ready, kind of licensing it out to more and more parties.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
We definitely eat our own dog food. So like when we go to our corporate partners and we say, these are the things that we've learned and these are the things that we'd like to explore with you, there's actually some substance behind that, right? Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. It's kind of like presenting the proof of concept, but not just like a small proof of concept. Like this is a thriving ecosystem with 3 million active users. So it kind of proves out the point when you need to make those kind of enterprise deals.
Yeah, that's right. It's always a more effective pitch when we can, instead of saying, here's some mock-ups of it, or here's an idea of how we think it will work, we say, let's just fire up Sliver right now, and you can see on your laptop right now, you can start earning tokens, you can see how you can use them back on the platform. It's very effective.
So you guys started Sliver first. You said late 2015, early 2016. So walk us through kind of like that light bulb moment. You mentioned like conversation with Dovi from Primitive, and maybe what other kind of things really made you take that dive? Because this is a pretty big departure from just being a streaming company to also providing that streaming bandwidth. So talk us through the thought process and why it was a good move on that.
I think a big part of what our company does, like the company ethos, is we're pretty much on the cutting edge, right? Like serving a user base that's also young, males 18 to 30 years old. So our user base is ready to kind of experiment with and adopt disruptive technology, right? So we thought this is kind of the perfect user demographic to test something or to utilize a new technology on, right? So at that time, like Wes mentioned, blockchain was just coming to the forefront, right? And you look at all these use cases and all these value propositions that blockchain technology can give us. We said, hey, we should really trust what our VC is saying and then test it out, like this decentralized approach where you're allowing users to earn these tokens. We, at that time, already had virtual currency that was being used on our website to, users could earn it by answering trivia, by getting loot boxes and stuff like that. So we said, if we were able to, underpin this virtual currency with, actual technology and allow users to earn these Theta tokens on top of it for contributing their resources, then why not do that, right? And I think it's that initial hypothesis that we had really worked out well. The user demographic that we've had kind of overlays and has a lot of overlap with the crypto community.
Like over the past few years, maybe talk about the journey from starting Sliver to now starting Theta, and from kind of that past to that present view. What was that like?
It's certainly, there's a very big difference between running a company that's a private esports streaming company and one that has, I think the big difference, besides just jumping into blockchain technology, one with a traded token. It's a whole nother world, as you know from your experience with IoTalks. But our team is pretty tight knit, and a lot of us had background in the blockchain space. Our CTO JE did a lot of his graduate research in distributed systems, so. It was kind of just a great fit that our team was suited to be moving into that. And as Tim was mentioning, it solved a lot of problems that we had. It didn't feel like we were forcing anything, because the more we dug deeper about the idea of launching Theta, we realized how much easier it was going to make our lives as a company, because it was so well suited to it. Like we mentioned, cutting out CDN costs for us, which is a problem, but it goes beyond that. Like we had a huge problem with the virtual currencies we have, where users would buy with credit cards, and we'd have fraud and chargebacks to the point where at one point we had hired a specialist just to fight credit card fraud on a virtual currency, because it was such a big problem. And we realize there's people out there who all they will do is look for exploits to do that. So moving to something like crypto, where it's a bearer asset and there's no chargebacks, that even by itself solved so many problems for us. And allows us to actually have smaller margins for our users, because unlike a lot of businesses, we don't have to build in a margin for fraud, because we know we're actually going to receive the crypto assets.
Not to mention the margin for credit card transactions as well, which I think is like 2.5%.
Yeah.
So I mean, all of these small incremental costs start adding up in the long term.
It's definitely from the user's perspective, all those things are super important too.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we talked a lot about the past. Now let's talk more about the present.
Sure.
So I just did a quick Google search about issues with streaming today. And what came up with is the current streaming models are low quality video, high cost of infrastructure, as you guys mentioned, and also putting a lot of blame on an inefficient centralized ecosystem. So what do people mean by this centralized ecosystem within streaming, and who are kind of the players that they're talking about? So you mentioned like CDNs, ISPs, internet service providers, and people that kind of operate these POPs, but like who are what's the full circle of hierarchy in streaming? Yeah,
the full circle is, I could talk through like how video is delivered, right? All the way from you have one piece of content, right? And then it gets ingested into a server, and then the server will basically transcode it so that you have different qualities of this video stream, right? And then you send it over to the content delivery network with its vast physical infrastructure, and then those video streams are all cached at different qualities, right? And then depending on your internet connection, depending on what your bandwidth is, then the content delivery network will choose the appropriate bit rate basically to stream the video at, right? And then it'll adjust up and down based on your internet connection. So all the bigger players are all the centralized ones like Akamai, Amazon CloudFront. There's Cloudflare. Google probably has their own CDN
and
as well.
And those are kind of the CDNs and transcoders. Are they together, or are they kind of separate entities?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of them have become full stack now, right? So they handle ingest, they handle transcode, and then the last part is delivery as well.
Right.
Yeah, so the layer that we're sitting in is basically delivery, and especially last mile delivery, right? So the issue I mentioned earlier, especially for developing countries, is there are just a lot of users on the very edge, that aren't able to get that same quality of service that other users would get in a fully built out CDN infrastructure area, right? This is literally edge computing and edge redistribution of resources, where you're basically delivering to one person on the edge, and then they're basically able to proliferate this data and this video stream to others in their area as well.
That's interesting. I never knew that. So like you have maybe like 4 or 5 versions of a video, all the way from 240p to 1080p.
Right.
Yeah.
And like when you all of a sudden get hit with some buffer, then it's going to jump to another track.
Yeah, kind of. So that's why you might see kind of like a decrease in your video quality, because basically your player, if it hasn't stalled out and started buffering, it kind of knows that it's adjusting for the internet connection, and then it might give you more pixelated video.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the centralized model. So talk to us about the decentralized model. Like, do the players change, or are some of those middlemen in like full stack CDNs even removed from the equation? What does that kind of ecosystem look like?
That's a really good question, and the answer to are they removed is no, right? Because I think you could call it like a misconception of a lot of these crypto projects right now, and they're going for full decentralization. That's not what our approach is, at least. I think we have a more pragmatic and measured approach, which is we're telling our corporate partners, hey, you can keep your existing infrastructure, you can keep your existing CDN right now. We're not asking you to swap that out and replace us, right? Maybe somewhere down the road, 15 to 20 years, when our mesh network gets completely built out, right? Hopefully, millions and hundreds of millions of users will be in the Theta mesh network. And at that point, it makes sense to be the de facto content delivery network, right? A fully decentralized one. But in order to gain adoption, especially from these enterprise and corporate partners, that's not a viable avenue to go down on day one, right? So we're saying right now, keep your existing infrastructure, and the Theta layer will go on top of it, right? So we have sophisticated mechanics that say if this video player can't fetch a video segment in, say, 60 milliseconds or something like that from the Theta network, then you can default back to your CDN. So that on the player side, on the user's player side, there's never any disruption to their video quality or their video viewing experience, right? Which is what these video platforms, that's their number one priority, to keep their users happy, right? So on the video platform side, if they're able to offload 40, 50, 60% of their bandwidth to the Theta Mesh network, then that's a real tangible value proposition to them. So that's our initial go-to-market, right? It's to be the supplementary layer on top of their existing infrastructure, and hopefully, 7 years, 10 years down the road, when we've really gotten critical mass of the Theta Mesh network, then at that point we can start the conversation to go a fully decentralized route.
Right. Yeah, that fully decentralized route definitely requires a lot of social change management also, and adoption and things like that. You kind of have to work with the traditional systems, but again, like you said, kind of working alongside them and not trying to completely wipe them out, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, and like Tim said, it's just a pragmatic thing. Like if you're starting a DTube or it doesn't even need to be video, some fully decentralized system from day one, that's fine, but it's just an absolute non-starter to go to a centralized service now and say in one fell swoop, get rid of all your existing infrastructure and plug in this early stage new technology. That's just not how it works for a large enterprise.
Yeah, we think about this too in IoTalks world. Kind of like a lot of our use cases have to do with like tracking and tracing things, right? So one solution, if you wanted to track and trace all your assets, is you can put sensors everywhere and kind of track and trace it for yourself. Or you can use a FedEx API. Or like an EasyPost API.
Right.
You just grab those data points, but maybe secure them on the blockchain, right? It's like figuring out ways to mesh those two worlds together. The most important and new technologies are happening on the blockchain while kind of supplementing what's going on in the real world.
We don't have to burn down the entire existing system just to add something new to it.
Maybe in 5-10 years we'll burn down the existing systems together. But you guys mentioned this a little bit around like the demographics of streaming, like males 18 to 35 years old, but kind of like where globally is streaming huge? I know you guys have a lot of partnership with Samsung and are very big in Korea. So talk to us more about like the global presence of streaming.
Yeah, I mean, we talk demographics like male, the typically younger demographics. That's more come to our esports application of Sliver TV, but of course streaming is ubiquitous. Everyone either is a creator or user or both of streaming content. It's pretty globally distributed throughout the developed world, but obviously hugely important markets to us are Korea, China, Japan, and a lot of that's due just because the rate of adoption. Like by the time that mobile streaming has become totally blanketed the U.S., like we're already 5 years behind what's already been done. And you can see that even coming in new stages like 5G. We're having discussions about a couple of years having nationwide 5G when in Korea it's already being rolled out right now. And so it's not that streaming is less common in other parts of the world, but we're mostly focused in places where they're already taking the steps to lay out the infrastructure for what's coming.
Right. It's also going back to that social change kind of thing. People are just more receptive to these new technologies and things like that.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on the fact that in Korea at the enterprise level, the level that they're embracing blockchain technology is like night and day compared to a lot of U.S. companies. Now that's changing too, and we're starting to see a lot more both in video streaming and in other enterprises in the U.S. That's changing, but certainly we focused a lot on Korea just because we've seen them even 12, 18 months ago, we're already fully committing that they see this as transformative to a lot of their different business lines.
Definitely, yeah. Korean kind of blockchain is very centered around enterprises. You have like all the big telcos have their own kind of little blockchain teams. Kakao has their Clayton blockchain, and all these different kind of big centralized institutions going down this kind of decentralized route. How do you guys work with them? Like, what are those conversations?
That's a great example, actually, because we recently announced that we're going to be launching a Sliver TV Korea mobile app that's going to be built in conjunction with Clayton.
That's awesome.
So you can think of it as Theta is powering the streaming underpinnings of this mobile app, but at the app level, there's an engagement currency that will be powered by Clayton and their new token. So that's something that the equivalent to Kakao here in the U.S., they're taking steps to. They may see a big announcement coming from Facebook in the next couple of weeks, but Kakao, Samsung, LG, these guys are already have a year or two ahead on these groups.
And you ask about what's the state of streaming right now, right? You just look at YouTube TV, right? The NBA Finals just finished, right? And I don't know if you guys watch, but like every single commercial is like sponsored by YouTube TV, sponsored by
free trial.
Right.
Yeah, I watched all the finals on YouTube TV.
You see this big shift, right? Which is you're taking, or these companies are taking all their content that used to be distributed over digital and cable and over the air, and then it's all being shifted over to being delivered over IP, which is the internet, right?
Yeah.
So you see, like it's a fundamental shift, right? I think the stat is like right now about like 67% of all internet traffic is video, and by 2022 or something like that, it'll be like 83% of all internet traffic, right? So streaming is really a big use case across esports, across traditional media, and all these sorts of emerging media as well, right? VR, AR. 5G types of use cases. All of these things will have some form of delivering their media over the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up like 4G and 5G, and maybe this is a good chance to jump over to IoT and connectivity and its relationship with streaming. I feel like both of those are enabling factors, kind of vice versa also, right? The more advanced kind of IoT and edge computing gets, as well as different connectivity standards releasing, it expands the possibilities of streaming, and also kind of vice versa. How do you guys see that relationship? And as IoT and connectivity advance, how does that kind of affect your roadmap and your business priorities?
Yeah, I'd say IoT is a huge part of our roadmap, right? So if you look at it right now, our current use case is with live streaming, and we're starting to handle video on demand. We started with the PC web. We also have a mobile SDK now, which we've been able to, it's an Android mobile SDK that we've been able to port onto other Android native devices, right? Like the CJ Viewing Box. So the CJ Viewing Box is basically, think of it in terms of like an Apple TV or a Roku box, but it's running the Android TV operating system. So we've been able to take what we developed for the mobile platform, and then ported it over to a TV set-top box. In the future, I think some people in our community have said that they've been able to run Theta on a small Raspberry Pi, right? That's the most common consumer IoT kind of device out there. And then in the future, you see a big use case will be these TV set-top boxes, and also smart TVs, right? Smart TVs are basically like a mini computer now, right? You have the RAM specifications. Most top of the line TVs ship with, I think, 4 to 6 gigs of RAM. And then local storage, I think the lower end ones ship with like 16 gigs. The higher end maybe shipped with like hundreds of gigs of local storage. So then what you can do is you can contribute all of these hardware devices onto the Theta network. And how often do you watch your TV, right? Maybe 3, 4, or 5 hours. Maybe a day, maybe 2 hours a day, maybe over the course of a week, a little bit more than that. The point is, it's an idle resource that's sitting there most of the time. So when it's not being used, and even when it is being used, what if we could, and it's got all the necessary prerequisite specs that would function as a node on the Theta network. So we could just take that, and then you could be earning passive income that way, right? Earning passive Theta tokens in return for having your device on the Theta network.
That's a really good point. I feel like when I watch TV now, I'm not even watching TV. I'm watching YouTube on my TV. Or like Netflix on my TV, right? So is TV actually just going to go away, do you think? Or like with like as all this stuff advances, right? Like connectivity gets cheaper, these smart TVs get cheaper, streaming gets cheaper.
Yeah, in the very traditional sense, like the linear broadcast, I don't know about go away, but it's definitely transforming. I think the market already is kind of spoken as consumers have shown which model they prefer. And going along with that, it's all moving to IPTV because of that. So pretty much any new video platform or any new streaming service that's coming out, it's one that's moving in a way that can benefit from all these connected devices. I don't think we're going backward toward the traditional broadcast method.
No, that makes sense. Just touching on that CJ Viewing Box, I think the set-top boxes are really interesting. They're just like mini computers, right? They can be full nodes on the blockchain. We've heard of like a lot of different use cases, streaming, authenticating these things, Even taking it with you. When I was a consultant, I used to bring my Fire Stick and just plug it into the hotel, and it would carry my preferences over.
Yeah.
And I feel like doing that in a more decentralized fashion, sharing what you watch for compensation to like advertisers, things like that, really flipping the model. But what kind of use cases in the future, outside of streaming, do you see, or kind of tangential even to streaming, do you see with these set-top boxes?
Yeah, we think about a lot of different things beyond that, even though we started video streaming in large part just because it makes up such a significant amount of internet traffic, like we talked about. But there's a lot of data delivery use cases that meet a lot of the same characteristics if we're talking about concurrent users. Like we think a lot about game updates. Like if a new Fortnite patch goes out, there's no reason for millions of different players to all download it from a centralized server if they're clustered in areas where they aren't, because first of all, it tends to be they're all downloading around the same time. A new patch comes out, 75% of the users are going to get it within a day or so. So you have that that high density peer-to-peer network potential. And on top of that, you're storing it on your device already. So then you don't even have to think about extra storage space to cache this, because it's already being saved on there just by virtue of needing to run the game. So
what you're saying is kind of like people would, or first critical mass of people would download the patch from the centralized server, and then almost like a BitTorrent model where you just kind of seed it to people around you.
It's literally on your phone, right? That's how you're able to use it. So, you could take that. And the thing about the use case that Wes is describing is that there's no time sensitivity, right? When you're live streaming something, the video segments have to be downloaded one by one and stitched together in order. But with a game patch or, a video advertisement or something like that, when there's no real-time requirement, it can be done over the course of an entire night or something like that, right? If it's like 20 gigs or 30 gigs or something like that. The point is the data can be downloaded out of order and then restitched together, reformatted together. So that's a really compelling use case that is definitely somewhere down the road, and it's on our roadmap.
Yeah, it's like breaking humans down to atoms and putting them back together.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's not even that alien a concept. It sounds like it is, but BitTorrent's been in use for years. It's really almost more of a go-to-market that's different, because we're working directly with the content providers or the hardware manufacturers to do this in a way that actually is a legitimate business case and is done through the people that are providing the data that's doing it. But it's not as far off as it sounds. It's technically sound.
Right. So the use cases all make sense, right? What about the business case? So all these things that we're talking about, how does it really transform the landscape, right? Is it revenue generating? Is it cost saving? Or is it kind of protecting against these like tail end insurance kind of things? Like, how would you summarize what the opportunities in the near term are, at least for
the answer to the question is yes, right? So I think the first thing we can demonstrate to our partners is the cost savings component, right? It's a very tangible, quantifiable first step, right? So we can go to, say, Samsung VR and say, hey, Samsung VR, we can offload 40 to 50% of your video bandwidth that you're delivering, right? Which is costly to them because it's quite a lot, especially 360 VR. And then that's kind of the first step, and they'll say, okay, we'll do the integration. The integration's not, a long drawn out process. It's pretty short. And then we can prove that out over the course of a couple weeks or a month, right? And then after that, the next step after is, okay, we've realized the cost savings, but what more can we do, right? Cost savings is nice, but what's more compelling than cost savings is driving incremental revenue. So when you have these tokens that our users or Samsung VR's users are able to earn, or CJ's viewers are able to earn, what do they do with them? Of course, they can take them to an exchange and then just exchange it for fiat currency. But if you're earning it on the platform and you enjoy interacting and engaging with the platform, then there's a chance for these platforms to, put premium products and services in front of you and kind of make it interesting for you to purchase them with the tokens that you've earned, right? And perhaps it's some sort of subsidization, right? So say you earn $2 worth of tokens and a movie costs $4 or $5, then you weren't willing to pay the $5 up front, but with $3 worth of tokens and you just pay $2 for the movie, that's still an incremental revenue increase for Amazon Prime, for instance, right? So that's really a really interesting use case. The other thing, what we've seen on Sliver TV is that we've seen drastic increases in average engagement, so average session times. You can obviously tell that one of our competitors is Twitch, right? They're much bigger, but we think we have some interesting mechanics there that can, really prove this concept out. And so we've seen 2.5 to 3x, so triple the average session times compared to what Twitch is seeing with their users. I think they're seeing somewhere around 90 minutes on average per day per user. On our channels with T-Fuel activated, if you're able to earn T-Fuel, it's more in the range of like 250 minutes, right, to 270 minutes, which is really compelling if you can, go to a corporate partner and say, we'll increase your engagement by 3x.
Yeah.
So
what do you attribute that kind of increase in engagement to? Is it kind of the natural kind of things you built into the platform that make it easier for people to talk to each other, or is it the concept that you're making the passive revenue, or again, kind of both, right?
Yeah.
I think it's both, because when you actually look at that, you can think of it as the past Sliver model before the introduction of Theta to the network, and even now some of the channels as they're being migrated over, there's still some that are not powered by Theta. And you can see the jump from, say, Twitch session time to Sliver's traditional model to when you add Theta Network to it, and it's even more so that these session times are extended. So I think part of it's kind of the more engaging platform model, but part of it's also the monetary benefit to it. I mean, of course, that's why we think adding a token incentive is so transformative here, is that people respond to economic incentives, and we're seeing it, in real time.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's super interesting. So that's a lot about the present of streaming. Let's jump into kind of the future, right? So some big news from you guys a couple months ago. You guys launched your mainnet.
Yeah.
Congrats on that.
Thank you.
One of many in March and April.
Yeah.
It seems like mainnet heaven for a lot of folks.
Yeah, we were all in the same kind of cohort there.
Yeah, but you guys had a great launch and, are working on a number of things post-mainnet. You want to talk a little bit about your post-mainnet roadmap?
Yeah, so on the technical side of things, we're mostly focused on Q3 of this year when we're launching our Guardian node functionality, which is sort of the second line of defense and consensus for us. And the first being validator nodes that are just quick breakdown of it. So a smaller set of Guardian validator nodes that are run by Theta now and soon spreading out to our first third-party validators, which we're excited to announce. Hopefully first one by end of this month, but several in the next coming months. And then the Guardian node set, which is the hundreds and thousands of community-run nodes that participate in block finalization. So both important parts of consensus, but the latter especially important so that the community actually has a stake in governance. And it's very important for us to get to that point where, in the early stages where Theta Labs obviously has an outsized say in how protocol development happens, but that's not a permanent situation, and we're excited to get to a point even to later this year where all the community stake in Theta has a direct vote in governance of the protocol.
Yeah, that's a big step for sure, and I think one that a lot of projects are definitely starting to introduce, but that's really a tricky one if you're trying to decentralize these upgrade proposals and things like that. Has to be kind of make sure that people can't game the system too much, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a trade-off, and we've always said that our plan is to essentially decentralize over time, and not from day one. And I think that kind of dovetails into our approach, like we've said with enterprises too. We see it as an incremental process, not a day one. It's a choice. I mean, there's obviously a legitimate projects that have done it otherwise, but we think that's what will be most beneficial for this network.
Yeah, in the long run, for sure. I think, getting that initial marketing buzz, we see a lot of enterprise announcements that seem a little sketchy, to put it nicely. But yeah, I think, establishing the real business case and pushing that forward is, what the solid projects are definitely trying to do.
Yeah.
What else would you say about the post-mainnet roadmap?
I'd say, we're working hard with our partners, right? So a lot of the partners that we've been beta testing with on testnet, they all have slightly different use cases. They all fall under the general umbrella of video streaming. But like I mentioned, Samsung VR, which does 360 VR streaming, is different from CJ Hello, which does, they have an OTT app, a video streaming app in their set-top box. And they also have this CJ shopping channel. So think of that in terms of QVC, what we have here, right? So slightly different use cases, and then what underpins that is the business case itself, right? So once these users start earning these tokens, what do they do with them? How do they spend them? What are the ways that we allow them to spend it on? And then also, I think a big aspect of that, to get in the nitty-gritty a little bit more, is fraud detection and fraud prevention as well, right? Because now that everything is on the mainnet, it's not just about the test net was about how do we improve and fine-tune our protocol so that the consensus works. But then now it's kind of like, now that the users are able to earn these real Theta tokens that can be ported over to the exchanges and they have real-world value to them, we have to be able to make sure that this protocol is robust enough so that it doesn't get gamed, right? It doesn't, you can't have some malicious actor spin up realistically like 10,000 nodes and then kind of like milk all the tokens out, right? And it's very crucial to, I think, establishing a long-term kind of utility for the actual Theta protocol.
Yeah, we experienced the same thing like post mainnet. So we launched our delegated proof of stake program. And once you have those live economics and you have delegates getting real rewards and you have delegates paying voters those real rewards, then it kind of it puts a lot more skin in the game. It's less testnet, theoretical kind of things traded on exchanges, but it's more, committing yourself to this network and getting returns passively almost from it, right?
And it's more of an incentive for malicious actors to kind of step up their game a little bit more also, right? So in return, we have to kind of preempt that and put these defensive mechanisms in, right?
Yeah, the scammers are getting more and more sophisticated. I don't know if you guys...
It's a constant battle. I mean, we're talking more about maliciously spinning up nodes to share bandwidth with fake users to get things, but in every way the scammers are relentless.
I've seen a few fake accounts of myself. It's kind of flattering.
But, I've been getting a lot of that too.
Weird as well.
There's plenty of fake Wes's out there, fake Mitches. They're faking even the bots in the delegator channels. It's unfortunate because I do think that it's a constant drag on new people getting into the space, because every time someone comes in and gets taken advantage of, you can see why that might leave a bad taste in someone's mouth and write off this whole crypto thing to begin with.
Once shame on you, always twice shame on you.
Yeah, exactly.
So people learn after one kind of experience with that, but to all the fake Wes's and Tims, stop doing what you're doing.
Seriously.
But let's talk even more to the future, right? So imagine that, Sliver and Theta really evolve and cut latency in half, cut costs in half, right? And all the things that you're trying to really accomplish come true. What does the world look like after that?
Yeah, so certainly if we can cut costs in half for all this delivery, it's beneficial to any streaming platform or any business that's delivering data. But we actually think the more transformative part is not really saving costs. It's activating this network of unused devices contributing to this network and being incentivized for it. And the way that behavior changes, where you don't think of a hardware device as like a sunk cost, that's something that can almost become pay for itself or revenue generating. So the cutting costs is in a lot of ways just the short-term hook. But it's what happens when you actually get all these users with aligned interests contributing to this network where things get really exciting.
Right.
And in the short long term, I guess you could call it, is the companies that adopt this kind of approach first, right, will have some sort of competitive edge, right? Alluding to the point that Wes just mentioned, right? If you buy this TV box, right, and the payback period is 9 to 12 months, right? And then on top of that, after the 9 to 12 months, then the user generates passive income, right? Whether it's $7, $10, $15 a month or something like that. It's still, it's still compelling to the user to buy this. And it's a differentiating aspect compared to what another competitor would have, right? Which is just you buy your TV box for $70 and you use it, right? All other things considered even in terms of content, in terms of interactivity and engagement on these two services, right? Like you're definitely more inclined to have a user that will buy something that will pay back itself, right?
Yeah, that's something we're excited for as well. Like we have a big project launching soon. It's called Avo Board. It's kind of our first developer board in-house hardware. and it doubles as a development board, but it's also, when it's idle, it has like the certain amount of trusted computing bandwidth, which is the thing that can power like privacy computation. So issuing that out so that people that don't even own this device can tap into it, and people that own the device can make their own kind of returns and even pay back the cost of that device over time.
Right.
There's a lot of different models like this, right? Like starting kind of from Filecoin, like if you have extra storage, lend it out. But storage is more of a commodity these days, and so is kind of like Wi-Fi and even like long-range, low-power, like LoRa connectivity. But I think, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is that a model that will work if the supply of something is too big? Then the demand side is less so, or is it just kind of cutting the margins lower and lower and lower and lower and making it almost kind of a global resource that people can tap into?
Yeah, generally speaking, obviously, if supply is just in the broad sense outstripping demand, then it's going to commoditize itself. But there's been a couple times before where this has happened, where it seemed like as a threat to streaming, like compression is the big one that. One of our advisors, Kyle Okamoto, that was at Verizon for a long time, told us about that. It was seen as a bad thing for CDNs because if you compress the amount of data, then in nominal terms, there's less data by the byte being moved through, so that hurts their revenue. But the reality, it doesn't play out like that. All it did was enable
more data to be sent through the existing infrastructure.
Exactly, higher definition video, or just different use cases that weren't possible because it's less expensive now.
Right.
So we see it the same way. Like there's always going to be efficiency gains made there, but demand for streaming video and data in general is increasing at a faster pace.
Yeah.
Like I mean, you can just know that generally. I think the amount of data generated in the last something like 2 to 3 years is equal to all of the data generated in history prior to that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like and we have kind of a very personal connection to that when we were pushing VR video from our early days with Sliver. We realized just how much more data is, no pun intended, but coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think there are a number of really interesting use cases that are kind of on the horizon related to streaming and video and blockchain as well that we are not focusing entirely on right now, right? And a few use cases include digital rights management, right? So the media industry as a whole is really invested in, anti-piracy, anti-counterfeiting, right? So digital rights management. So what we can do on the blockchain is, even on our Explorer right now, you have these video IDs, right? Of that are connected to a transaction, right? So what that enables us to do is basically trace one video segment back to its inception, its point of origin, right? So that you know exactly where this video stream and this video segment came from, right? The point of origin from there. So that really helps in terms of, like, it's called digital watermarking, right? You know exactly where it came from. So there's no...
Anywhere it shows up, you kind of automate the payments associated with that even.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing we can do with these video IDs is basically have more interesting kinds of business models in terms of really granular pay per view, right? So right now you can say, oh, I want to watch a boxing match that's on HBO and I can buy it for like $12.99 or something like that. In the future, it can be, I want to watch 30 minutes or 20 minutes of this show, and then because the blockchain records every video segment that's been relayed over to you, then and it appends it with a microtransaction, then we can charge you by even the second of how much video that you can consume, right? So instead of a monthly subscription where you're paying $15, it could be you watch 3.5 hours of this video and from this one service, and you maybe pay $2.50 or something like that, right?
I think the world is ready for that. I think I am, right? Like, I looked at all my monthly subscriptions and it's just stacking up. I can check one off because I don't need HBO now that Game of Thrones is over.
Right.
But like, you have all of them, whether they're like little shared family accounts or something. So is that all you think is gonna start to change as well? Like more pay per views and
I don't think the subscription model is going to go away, but we're already getting to a point where people have subscription fatigue with 5 different video streaming services, with your Netflix and your Hulu and your HBO, and Disney's got one coming down the pipeline. I think CBS has their own. It's just more and more, and no one's going to pay $10 for all of those. So you're either going to have to pick and choose, and then you're back in the same problem you had with the cable TV, where you have the packages you pick. Or it just moves to a an a la carte style where you actually can just consume the content you want at a very granular level.
Yeah. I'm excited to see more of the P2P content sharing I think come to life too. Not just like streaming themselves playing video games or streaming live sports events or things like that, but also it gives people the chance. Like I feel like for content creators, one of the things they really search for is validation, or validation that what they built is great.
Yeah.
Like even people posting all this content on Instagram, not necessarily monetizing it, but just trying to get that self-validation for themselves, right?
And the blockchain allows exactly that, right? It allows the content creator to receive the proper attribution, right?
Yeah,
because
without the middlemen taking 30% off the top.
Yeah, if there's a resource ID appended to everything that the content creator actually produces, and then I'm consuming something with that video ID, then that basically, the attribution goes from him to me directly, right? And then I'm able to say, hey, if I'm consuming this, then out of my goodwill, I'm able to donate XYZ amount, just for supporting this content creator, right?
Yeah, it really unleashes a lot of new models, not just reducing costs, but creating all these new engagement and business models.
Yeah. And we found users are very generous with what they're earning for what. I think a lot of people, even though it's their resources, the fact that it's kind of a sunk cost to you that you paid for this bandwidth connection, what you're earning for contributing that bandwidth to the network, you almost think of as like house money. You're like, of course I'll donate half to the content creator because I like that content, whereas you're probably not going to have that behavior if you have to pull a couple bucks out of your pocket or whip out the credit card and do it. Or you may, but fewer. Whereas when you think of it as just something you contributed to the network, you got this back, and now you'll donate some back to it, you don't feel like you really gave anything up.
Right. I agree, for sure. No, that's a lot to think about, and I think, really great session. I always like to close these with, one bold prediction about what crypto world is going to be like 1 year from now. Yeah, what's the world going to look like?
I will go back to, I'll not be cheap and just say something about Theta and pump our project, but going back to the Facebook announcement, I think they're going to launch in early 2020. You're already starting to see kind of the two camps forming, where some people think because Facebook and validators with Visa and Uber and all these jumping into the space, it must be good for the crypto space. But that's definitely not a foregone conclusion. Like this could be a Trojan horse in a lot of ways if you wake up one day and realize that one company down the street from us right now is controlling the financial transactions of billions of people. So it starts off as great for adoption, but you may actually see a lot of people reinforcing their belief in Bitcoin because it's not controlled by one corporation.
It goes against the decentralization aspect of it, but I think to the more traditional players in the world, right? I think there's some legitimacy that accompanies this kind of large project, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I was with a couple of friends just yesterday, and they're all bankers. They're the more traditional guys, and they're like, no, I still don't believe in Bitcoin. I still don't believe in crypto. And I understand where they're coming from as well, but I think with the more legitimate large corporations kind of moving into this space, that kind of and building out an actual use case for it, right? Then I think slowly it'll come about.
Yeah, it will bring that credibility. I've got a family member who thinks I lost my damn mind by going from finance into the blockchain space, so I'm definitely going to use this to say, see, I'm not the only one here. Look at all these companies you've heard of.
Exactly. Well, we'll track that closely. We'll also track what you guys are doing closely. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
And definitely stay tuned for some cool IoTalks and Theta collaborations in the future.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.